What did you think of the play overall?
Well, I thought it was a very good production, and I thought the setting and the direction of it was really interesting because they had a very bare setting for it, and I think it really highlighted kind of that saintliness of Thomas More, the believer in him. But I you know, when I first read the play years ago and saw the movie, and now I'm not the biggest fan of the dramatic action of the play.
And what do you mean by that, the dramatic act? I mean, is it
well,
sort of
I mean,
dull for
it
you,
really is a compelling story, and it obviously, you know, St. Thomas More's life is an inspiration, and but in terms of drama, in the sense that you have a protagonist who his emotional conflict changes throughout the trajectory of the plot. It doesn't change very much. So there's a kind of lack of movement for me.
Lack of conflict almost in him?
A little bit. I mean, because you can see that he's conflicted and he wants to, there is some conflict in that he doesn't want to abandon his family and that sort of thing. But in terms of charting, you know, from the beginning he believed that, you know, he would not condone the marriage, and from the end he would not condone the marriage, and there was really no shift in the reasons or why or his expression of it, and so that makes for a really compelling story, especially for the life of a saint. But in terms of watching the drama, it's not as compelling, I think.
Could you say that he's like the still point in the center of all these things that are this kind of maelstrom that's going on around him? Is there a dramatic interest in that, in having that kind of still?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still a successful play, but it's not. It could have been more successful if we had charted a little bit more of the change, if there had been a bit of a trajectory in how he first approached the issue and how he ended with it. So I think it's still very enjoyable to watch, but it doesn't quite have the same fervor that other plays might have in terms of inner conflict.
Well, that's an interesting point, because in a sense you're saying, you know, where he begins in a way is where he ends. I mean, he's very strong in his faith, and that's where he ends. Versus maybe what you're saying is that it would have been interesting if he had kind of progressed in his faith. Or
and that might have been disingenuous to the story of Thomas More himself, and you know, you don't want to forsake that. But in terms of just face value, you know, dramatic action,
I
think it lacks a little bit because of that.
And artistically, you need to present something like that.
I think there is a trajectory in it, but you're right, not in him. He's firm. He knows what he believes, but the opposition keeps growing. I think it starts off with he talks to Cardinal Wolsey, and already there's a hint that things aren't going to go well if he doesn't cooperate with the king, and then even the king has that long discussion with him, begging him to come around and threatening him. And then his best friend, the Duke of Norfolk, they actually, he pressures him a lot, saying, come along with us just for good company, you know, sign the thing. So it moves from the church, the government, the state, to his best friend, to finally his own wife and beloved daughter asking him, is there some way you can sign the oath? I sat there thinking, boy, I don't think I could withstand, you know, you have to be very self-directed to withstand that mounting and more focused pressure. Finally, your own wife and child are asking you to sign this. So I felt there was that trajectory in the play. Not his, because it's not a conversion story. It's not about him. It's an argument play, I think, and he has to maintain. Sort of like 12 Angry Men, you know, where the one guy maintains this guy is innocent. And finally brings everybody around. In this case, he didn't bring everybody around.
Now, speaking about that appeal, the appeal of the play and whether or not it draws us in, what do you think? Do you think there'd be much of an appeal for the modern day audience? I mean, this play originally came out in 1960, and I'd ask two questions. One, do you think people today would be as conversant with some of the religious undertones of the play? And two, there's a famous speech in there where he talks about the nation being built on laws, kind of a forest of laws. And a number of critics have mentioned that there are overtones of some of the things that this country has gotten ourselves into in terms of Abu Ghraib and after 9/11. So do you think, first question would be, is it relevant to people today in terms of the religious state of the country where people might be less familiar with those questions? And the second question would be, do you think it relates to sort of a post-9/11 America? You want to jump in?
Well, just briefly, the review that I did for America, that's what I highlight, that I think it really did change the focus of the play to this idea of that there's lots of people around who don't mind manipulating the law to get at what they really consider to be bad people and moral enemies. And I think we've seen a lot of that in recent years, and I really think, at least sitting there that night, I thought, boy, oh boy, this is a case of somebody who refused to bend the law.
And by the way, Mike's review is going to appear in American Magazine on November 17th, so readers should be on the lookout for that. And what do you think the appeal of the play would be for audiences today?
Well, I think there is a great deal of appeal because it's really a modern concept, what drives Thomas More, this inner conscience, you know. And I mean, each citizen, each voter, when they go to vote, which is tomorrow, as it happens to be, when it comes down to it, it's going to be your inner conscience that guides you. And I think that was a very modern notion that he infused in a play, and I think it's still really relevant in our society, in which, you know, laws are there to structure society and to give reasonable argument, but at the end of the day, it is often your inner conscience and what you feel you ought to do. So I think that's always resonant.
And especially relevant this election season.
Yes.
And you know, it's interesting, I just thought of that while you were talking about that, the fact that at that very time, the Protestant Reformation was occurring with a terrific emphasis on individual conscience, not completely turning your conscience over to the authority of the church or the country, but being guided by your own conscience. I think you're right. That's really something the play celebrates. And
so that we can agree on.
That we definitely agree on.
Yes.
So I'd like to thank both of you for joining us today. I'm Father Jim Martin for America Connects. I'd like to remind you that Mike Tuitt's review of A Man for All Seasons will appear in our November 17th issue. And also with our redesign that's coming up in January of 2009, we'll have an expanded coverage of culture. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in.